Good evening and welcome everyone to this, our first meeting this year of our Western Area Planning Committee, and a special welcome to those members of the public who are watching the streaming online. I'm Clive Hooker and I am chairman of this planning committee, and the members of the committee joining me this evening are councillors Adrian Abbs, Phil Barnett, Jeff Cant, Hilary Cole, Caroline Culver, Dennis Bennyworth, Tony Vickers, who's the vice chairman of this committee, and Howard Wollaston. And the following officers are attending and will be advising and present the applications this evening. And they are Simon Till, our Principal Planning Officer, Paul Goddard, our Highways Engineer, Sharon Armour, our Legal Advisor, and Jenny Legg will act as our clerk and take the minutes this evening. I'm also assisted by Stephen Shard, our Principal Policy Officer, who will be the Zoom host. Members, before we start this meeting, and to be consistent with our council meetings, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that we are subject to the council's code of conduct, which requires us to uphold certain standards, those being respectful to each other and to officers and members of the public present. Members are not always agree with one another or with the officer's recommendation, but I would ask that in any disagreements, we are always respectful of others' views and position. I would ask that we are mindful that officers are required to act professionally and impartially at all times in determining applications and in providing advice to this committee, and that they are expected to conduct themselves in a manner which preserves this position of impartiality in all that they say and do. We all therefore need to maintain mutual trust and an understanding of the position of the legal and planning officers in this committee and of each other. Members, thank you for that. I will ask Jenny Legg now, our clerk, to remind members and other attendees about the way we conduct council meetings via Zoom. Mrs. Legg, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Standard Zoom reminders will be shared on screen shortly. In addition to those points, if it becomes necessary for any members to telephone into the meeting, they won't be able to signal to speak. Therefore, once everyone who has raised a Zoom hand has spoken, I will ask the Chairman to invite anyone who is joined by telephone to speak in order. Voting on the planning applications will take place via a named vote. Members will be asked in turn by the legal advisor how they wish to vote, by stating they are for or against the proposal, or if they wish to abstain. Please remember to unmute yourself when voting. Any other votes will be conducted via a show of actual hands during the meeting. Unless the committee asks for the vote to be recorded, the outcome of the named vote will not appear in the minutes. So anyone wishing their vote to be recorded must indicate this before the vote is taken. If we need to adjourn the meeting at any point, the chairman will adjourn and advise the committee of the revised time and date of the meeting. If it's a short adjournment, you will be able to rejoin the Zoom meeting, otherwise a fresh appointment will be sent out. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed?
No, we have no shows of hands. Thank you very much, Mrs. Legg. Members, we now move on to the first item of the agenda. Apologies. We have a full house tonight. Over to you, Mrs. Legg. I guess there's no apologies.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 2 of the agenda, we have 2 sets of minutes this evening to approve. They are the minutes that were held on the 25th of November and the 16th of December. So firstly, if I could ask members, any observations of the minutes that were taken for the 25th of November? If you do, could you please raise your hand? No, we all seem very happy with your minutes, Mrs. Legg. May I have a proposer, please? Councillor Cole, thank you. And a seconder, Councillor Wollaston. Members, if you just indicate by raising your hands whether you agree that those minutes are a true record. And I will ask Mrs. Armour, do you agree? All in favour?
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. And I will sign them. Thank you, Mrs. Armour. We now move on to the second set of minutes, those taken on the 16th of December. Members, any observations? Please raise your hand. No observations. Thank you. A proposer, please.
I think Councillor Wollaston had his hand up.
You got your hand up, Councillor? Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, it's just to say I wasn't present, so I'll be abstaining.
Thank you very much for that indication. Do I have a proposer, please? I do. Councillor Pennyworth, and a second, Councillor Abbs. Is that okay, Councillor Abbs? Thank you. Proposer and seconder. All those in favour, please just raise your hand. Mrs. Armour.
Yes, the majority have approved.
Thank you. I will sign those minutes. Thank you. Members, we move on to item 3 of the agenda. Declarations of interest, please. No declarations of interest. Thank you. We do. Councillor Wollaston, thank you.
Thank you. On item 2, Chairman, I was lobbied by the applicant's architects, who also represented me on an application before I became a councillor.
Thank you. That is noted. I see no more hands raised. Oh, we do. Councillor Pennyworth, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have also been lobbied on application number 2.
Thank you. Any more? I'm looking. I can see no more raised hands. Thank you. We now move on to item 4, which is the planning applications this evening. We have 2 applications. The first one is Treetops at Hampstead Norris, and the second is Gallants View Lower Green at Inkpen. We'll go into a bit more detail when we come to those applications. So for just the benefit of those watching online, I'll briefly go and outline the format of each application. The officers will present the application to the committee. The drawings and site plans and any deemed relevant material submitted on the planning file will be shown as part of that presentation for the members of the committee and the public. I will then invite the clerk to read out the 500-word submissions. These will be shown on the screen for clarity from the following groups and in this order. Firstly, I will call on the parish council, any objectors, supporters, and then the applicant and agent. On the conclusion of those word submissions, those 4 word submissions, 4 500-word submissions, I will ask members if they have any questions of clarification on that submission. If they have, the attendees will be invited into the meeting to answer those questions. If they do not have any questions, the attendees will not be invited into the meeting. On conclusion of answering any questions, the attendees will be invited back into the waiting room by Mr. Shard. I will then invite the ward member to speak, and they will have 5 minutes to present their case. Members, they may then, on conclusion of that presentation, ask questions of clarification. The committee members will then have the opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the officers' presentations, and following that, the committee will discuss the application and vote on the decision. So that's the format for the meeting this evening, and the first application before us is application 20/01914/full. This is Treetops at Hampstead Norris. This is on page 63, members, of your agenda, and this is for a 2-storey front and side extension over basement to create a granny annex and carers room, and change of use of associated land to provide 2 additional ancillary parking spaces. Members, this has come to committee due to more than 10 letters of objection from the public. So therefore, I will ask Mr. Till to present this application to us. Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, am I sharing my screen?
You are, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Members, this application is for the erection of an annex to provide accommodation for an elderly relative, together with care staff accommodation and associated parking spaces at Treetops, formerly known as High View. The application site is located within the settlement boundary of Hampstead Norris, is within a conservation area and in the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty. A public right-of-way runs to the west of the dwelling. Your officer's recommendation is approval, and the application has been called to committee as 10 letters of objection have been received. Objections to the application raise the following matters: concerns that the description refers to 2-storey works, concerns regarding the appeal history of the site, concerns regarding the construction management and deliveries proposed, the potential utilisation of an existing farm track to the north of the site being utilised for vehicular access, the pressure for parking on the highway, concerns regarding the development of parking spaces outside of the settlement boundary, concerns regarding overlooking and overbearing impacts on neighbouring dwellings, and the dominant appearance of the dwelling in surrounding views and its impact on the conservation area. Members, turning first to the design of the proposed extensions, it's important to note the Conservation Officer's comments. Your update sheet includes the appeal decision for the replacement dwelling that was granted by the Planning Inspector in 2008. The Conservation Officer notes that at the time the Council contested the design of this dwelling as it was considered to be unsympathetic to the character of the conservation area, but the Inspector overturned that decision. The current dwelling, therefore, is a substantial and visually imposing structure on the edge of settlement and in the conservation area. The proposed works are for the erection of a two-storey extension with a basement level that is exposed from the rear. This is incorporated in a new half hip to the existing roof structure and a new subservient rear gable, which have both been designed to integrate well with the elevations of the existing dwelling. While comments in respect to the basement level effectively rendering this development three-storey are acknowledged, the existing dwelling is already set at a high level on top of a terrace, and therefore this additional basement floor isn't considered to increase the visual impact of the dwelling to any significant degree. The view from most public viewpoints surrounding the site would be limited to the alterations to create the new half hip of the roof on the front elevation, as you can see on that drawing. Neither do officers take the view that the description is misleading, as both the plans and submissions make clear reference to that basement floor. In respect to the form of accommodation proposed, it's accepted in the House Extension Supplementary Planning Guidance that accommodation for elderly relatives can be provided as ancillary to a dwelling. The SPG recommends that such accommodation is provided in a manner that is physically well integrated with the main dwelling so as to be easily absorbed back into the whole. Both annex and carers accommodation are designed to meet these requirements. Moving on to the parking and highways concerns, the report notes that parking within the conservation area is under considerable pressure and that this has resulted in considerable on-street parking. The Highways Officer has assessed the proposals and established that 2 additional parking spaces are required. These have been proposed at the foot of an agricultural tract to the northwest that falls within the applicant's ownership, and I'm just going to scroll back, I think, to the appropriate plan. Right, members, so this is the agricultural access track to the north within the blue line, and these are the 2 proposed parking spaces adjacent to the highway over to the northwest here. The Highways Officer has assessed the spaces and is satisfied that they're appropriately located in terms of highway safety and visibility. Members, I note objection raised concerns with 2 matters in particular in respect of those spaces. The first is that their use might result in unauthorised use of the agricultural access to the north of the site that's shown in blue on the plan I've just shown you, or its obstruction. The use of this access and incorporation of agricultural land into residential curtilage was subject to a previously dismissed appeal, i.e. one that the inspector refused. But that's not what is proposed. The works before you are simply for the provision of 2 parking spaces adjacent to the highway. They aren't for the integration of further agricultural land into the curtilage of the dwelling, and they're not located such as to obstruct the access. In respect to the concerns regarding use of the access for construction, the applicant has a right of access over his land that could lawfully be utilised for such works, and this isn't considered to raise concerns in planning terms. A construction management plan is recommended by way of condition to regulate construction impacts, and particularly those on the highway. Second matter raised in objection is that the parking spaces are located outside of the settlement boundary. In this case, the officer has assessed the visual impact and the relationship with the settlement boundary. As noted, there's already considerable on-street parking in this location, and northwest of the parking spaces, a hedge forms a transition into the countryside, screening the parking spaces from wider views. Objections have raised concerns in respect to the impact of the proposed extension on Mountain Ash, which is located to the south of the proposed extension. The case officer has assessed that windows along the northern elevation of this dwelling are secondary and would already be limited in terms of view by the existing terrace that Treetops is stood on. The extension would be located no closer to the existing built form alongside Mountain Ash. Concerns regarding overlooking have been addressed by the applicant in amending the drawings to remove a proposed terrace, and a condition requiring details of boundary treatments is recommended. Turning to the update sheet, as well as the appeal decision in respect to the replacement dwelling that I've already remarked on, I'd like to draw your attention to the amended wording of the tree protection condition that requires tree protection to be erected before any site clearance or other operations commence on site. Clearly, this is for the purpose of ensuring that tree protection is present before any works that might impact on trees actually take place. Members, subject to the conditions recommended in the report and the amended conditions on the update sheet, your officer's recommendation is for approval of this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Members, this is an interesting application, certainly with regards to the changing use on the parking. And on that basis, I've asked Mr. Goddard if he would just give us an update on highways and the situation there. Mr. Goddard, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Yes, your highway officers have assessed this planning application. The extension increases the number of bedrooms from 3 to 5 spaces. And therefore, on the basis of council's parking standards, there is a requirement for additional car parking. The plans before you, I think, are the only location where additional car parking can be provided without additional track works going all the way up to the property itself. So this is the closest that those spaces can reasonably get to the property. There have been objections that they are perhaps too far away from the property, but it's the closest we can get them, and that in itself is not, in our view, a reason for refusal. The 2 parking spaces are adequate. They're provided to all standards, along with an electric vehicle charging point. There's also been, as Mr. Till has mentioned, concerns over the land ownership and issues such as that. But that is not an issue for highways to consider, or indeed a planning issue. So therefore, your highway officers support the provision of these parking spaces, because as it's been mentioned, parking is quite congested in this particular part of Hampstead Norreys. Therefore, no objection is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Members, interesting one. This is the first time I can remember we've had no representations from any of the various partnerships or partners on this. We have nobody from the parish council, no objectors, and we have no supporters, and we don't have anything from the applicant or the agent. And I think I will just check with Councillor Calder. She is the ward member, and she doesn't need to address us this evening. Is that still the case, Councillor Calder?
Yes, that's the case, Chairman. I called in the previous application, which was subsequently withdrawn, but I waived my right to speak this evening because nobody has approached me about this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Therefore, we go back now to Mr. Till. Do we have any questions of Mr. Till's presentation this evening, members? Hand up. Yes, Councillor Vickers. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman. Actually, I was going to ask Mr. Goddard, but so I'll waive my right to speak at this present moment. But I would like to put a question to Mr. Goddard shortly.
Yes, certainly. We'll come on to that in a minute. I'll go on now. Councillor Abs, we're putting our hands up, our virtual hand. I did see your hand go up. Thank you very much. We'll go on to Councillor Wollaston. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I went to have a look at this over the weekend and I'm still slightly confused as to exactly where the 2 parking spaces are. Is it possible to have a look at the photographs showing where they are?
If you just bear with me, I shall share the screen. I've just found the relevant slide.
Thank you.
There you are. So that's a photograph taken of the entrance to the agricultural track.
But where exactly are the car parking spaces proposed? That's what confused me.
I think they're proposed basically where the photographer has stood from this view.
Okay.
Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. My question was, whose ownership is the parking spaces in? I see there's a blue line, but I can't work out whether that is that land is in the curtilage of the property or not.
Thank you, Councillor. The blue line indicates land that is also in the applicant's ownership, but outside of the residential curtilage of the applicant's property.
So that track is in the ownership of the applicant then?
Yes, the applicant has ownership.
That's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett.
Chairman, question, I'm not certain whether it's to Paul Goddard or Simon Till, but I'm more confused now seeing that photograph on the track. The incline away from the hard standing, to me, it is quite a considerable incline. Does it mean that they're actually going to dig into that bank to actually obtain the 2 parking spots? And will that then inhibit their access at the rear of the property, or is it a case that they're just going to have a real angle both the parking spots?
I think Mr. Goddard might be better placed to answer that question than I am.
We just wait for.
Sorry, Chairman. I had assumed that with the 2 parking spaces there, that there was sufficient room for the access track to still be used, considering the width of the access track as it joins the public right of way alongside the White Hart Public House. With regards to levels along there, I'm just going to get a picture up.
Deep incline.
The track goes around the back of the property. Yes, it is quite a steep incline.
Whilst you're doing that and coming up, if I could ask Mr. Sill to put up that, when we're finished here, just put the plan up again, please, of the block plan showing the blue area, the red area, and the parking area. And you might, I'll just come in here while Mr. Goddard's getting his thoughts together. Maybe you could just talk us through this change of use, because this is something that needs to be done. We've got a red area now in a blue area, change of use for the car parking. we could get that cleared up at this stage, please. Back to you, Mr. Goddard.
So, Mr. Till, do we have a photograph within your presentation that actually looks up the track past the pub?
Just bear with me a second, Mr. Goddard.
Because I am looking at it, the Google Street View, obviously from August 2014, and yes, there is quite an incline upwards. So those parking spaces, if provided on the left-hand side of that track, they would need to be retaining structures in and around them.
Absolutely.
But I still think that, considering the width of the track as it joins the public right-of-way that goes alongside the public house, there is still space to have the parking spaces and to allow continued use of the agricultural track as and when required.
I'm afraid I don't have any better pictures of the track than the one that I've already displayed. I will go back to
There's a very good picture on Google Street View. It looks up the track.
Are you able to share your screen, Mr. Goddard?
I can't, no, because I've actually got two machines going here.
Ah, right. Okay. I may be able to do that. Chairman, my apologies for the slight delay with this.
And thank Councillor Barnett for the question. I think there might be some concern here that we've obviously looked at this and said, yes, we can do car. Have we actually car parking here? We actually got a dimension of this track in first instance.
I can do that, Chairman.
Yeah, but
Chairman,
it's
not that wide, and it would need a difficult turning to come in and out. I would have thought, especially if there's something, if there's a vehicle parked at the back of the pub, it could be difficult. But anyway,
yeah, good point. I'd be surprised if we've made a decision on this and we don't know what the original width of the track is if we're looking at as access to the back of the house.
Chairman, the width of the track as it joins the public right-of-way is 10.7 metres wide. I've just measured it off the drawing. So as I say, there is space there to keep the track open.
And from that, Councillor Barnett's question, can you therefore give us an idea of what the access up the side of those two cars are when they're parked? What is the width of your parking? Just to answer two issues. One is there enough to get past those cars? And two, we'll come on to the gradient in a minute if we might.
Chairman, there would be sufficient space to get past those cars. The two parking spaces would be 4.8 metres wide.
Thank you. So we've got 5 metres thereabouts?
Yes.
Thank you.
6 metres.
I'll go back to Councillor Barnett. Councillor Barnett, does that answer your question?
Well, partially, but we'll wait and see how the debate, how the discussions take.
Yeah, and you had a second question there on the gradient, and we'll ask Mr. Goddard about that because that's where it was directed from Mr. Till. Any observations on the gradient, Mr. Goddard, with regards to, are there going to be works to, I suppose, put a wall or something around there to retain the soil? Is it? I don't know what you're thinking, or a gradient.
Chairman, I would imagine that would be the case, and we might, if members are so minded, perhaps we need, if one has been provided, a condition that details be submitted on that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Members, would you like to see the plan drawing that Mr. Till was going to put up, just to refresh our memories on the block plan? Maybe you could share that with us just a moment.
I'm just in process of doing that, Chairman, almost there.
Right, here we go. Right, there we are. So we're saying that's 10.6 or whatever across that area there. The red area is in excess of 4.8 or whatever. Yep. Okay, everybody happy? Thank you, thank you, Mr. Till. Right, I move on, and we have Councillor Apps, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A few things. The diagram that was just shown, the blue line went directly through a tree. So I'm not exactly sure where it was measured from, but hopefully that 10 metres will deduct the width of the trees that it kind of chopped through. I remain unconvinced by that. The other reason I remain unconvinced is the follow-on questions related to what is intended. It's an agricultural track, and it's not cars that generally go up agricultural tracks, but farm vehicles. They don't generally they're not as thin as cars generally. And also there's a lot of fields next door to it. I couldn't see an obvious gate and an obvious path that the agricultural vehicles were going round, but it did look like there was an entrance there at some point. Looking at the photos and so on. So that's one set of things, and then there were other things related to the house itself. I read all of the letters of objection, and I haven't heard the answer to the lady's question or the gentleman's question about the 1.6 meter reduction that's mentioned there. The calculations and percentages seem to include decking area as the house area, and I wanted clarification on whether or not decking areas are included in calculations that we do, and is decking part of the building line itself, which also had implications to various effects based on the reading of the objection letters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think some of that was observation, but in terms of the, you've mentioned the matter of calculation, and I assume that you're talking about proportionality there. This is not.
I may come on to that. I'm just trying to get the facts straight first as to whether.
Well, this is not a case where this is not a case where proportionality is actually a relevant issue. This is an in-settlement location, and proportionality in very general design terms might be a consideration, but in terms of assessing what is an extension to a dwelling rather than a replacement dwelling, in settlement rather than outside of settlement, the relevant assessment is whether the application, whether the works applied for are in keeping with the character and appearance of the area or result in other detrimental impacts. It's not in respect of the amount of extension that's proposed.
Do you mind if I ask for a little more clarification there?
Yes,
because
yes,
one of the questions, or one of the comments I made was related to the building line, and if the decking, which seems to be included in the building line, if it is included, then your statement is absolutely correct. If it's not, then in fact the extension would come out from the would change the building line. So I'm a little confused as to whether decking. All I'm asking for is, do from the reading, is decking included in the house's area or not? Is it considered the area within a house or not?
Well, decking is built form, so it has an impact in the same manner, and this is decking and terracing, so it has an impact in the same manner that any other form of built form would have. I'm slightly unclear as to whether I'm answering the question that's being asked there.
Okay, so maybe the bit about one of the objection letters talks about various proposals and reduction of 1.6 meters, but then could find no reference to it. Did you see that letter of objection? Did it ring any bells with you, or did it ring any bells with you rather?
I'm happy to be presented with the exact nature of the inquiry within it. I think.
Yeah, it's no worries. It was a letter. I can come back to it. There's plenty of other people who want to speak. So, and then the other bits of the question were related to the use of the track and what was intended to go up and down the track, which is, I guess, more of a question for the traffic officer.
Well, if I could come in there, I think, Mr. Till, we need. I think what we're looking for. I appreciate this situation. We have two instances here. One is the blue line, which is the ownership of the applicant, and we have the red line, which is appertaining to the actual building that we're looking at of a planning application. But within the blue line, we have a red line, which is the change of use. which from agricultural, which presumably it is, to car parking.
Yes.
And with regards to Councillor Abbs, not that I should put any words into his mouth, but he did sort of intimate the fact this is agricultural land, there could be tractors and what have you going over. You might enlighten us that this is not the case. This chap is not a farmer. He's not got a tractor. He has bought that to secure his curtilage or his views or whatever. There would be no gates. I don't know. You might advise us differently. Going into an agricultural field alongside this track. I think that's where maybe Councillor Abbs was coming. Councillor Abbs was coming from.
Mr. Goddard, do you have any comments in respect of the use of that track?
Chairman, I can imagine that the track would be used by a tractor and trailer, and from what we've seen within the site and on the laptop I'm on, I have got the street view up, which I think by looking at that, it may allay some of members' concerns because it is quite a wide track.
But to be practical on this, if you own the land and you've got a tractor and trailer and it's your cars, which it would be, you'd move the cars so you can get access. That's what I'm trying to get to, not to labour this, and it can come out, I think, in the discussion. If we could move on, please. May we? Councillor Abbs, you happy to move on here and bring it up maybe in the discussion?
Yeah, I didn't realise the question was so challenging, to be honest.
Well, you know what they say when you scratch at the scab.
I looked at the lane. I immediately went, where does the lane begin and where does it end? Okay, and if it begins and ends completely within the owner's curtilage and there's nothing to go further than that, that's one answer. But there are fields next to it and so on. So that's why I asked the question. I don't think I've got an answer, to be honest, but that's okay. Let's be.
Well, Mr. Till might advise us.
Paragraph 7.4 in the report, Chairman, sets it out.
Just enlighten us, Councillor Vickers. What does it say?
It says the track in question is a mud and grass track on agricultural land owned by the applicant.
Thank you.
Planting. No, the key question is the next matter is the next sentence. This track provides an established right of access for the neighbouring farmer to 2 gates and fields.
Thank you.
It does provide the ability to access the rear treetops.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. Therefore, I think we come back to the question of Councillor Barnett. At some stage, is there adequate room for the farmer to get past if there are 2 cars parking? I think that's answered that question. Thank you. I will now move on to Councillor Colback. Question to Mr. Till at this stage. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Till, just wanted some clarification. It's mentioned variously in the paperwork that the footpath from the main road up to the building could be used to take construction materials. It's a very, very steep footpath and it goes past the front door of at least one property. So I was just wondering, could we get some sort of clarity? Are we saying that they should use the track at the back? Which would concern me because it looks extremely narrow and there's lots of trees there. So I think any kind of construction traffic might damage those trees. And if we are recommending that, are we going to say to the applicant that they should not use that steep footpath for the movement of any construction items?
Thank you, Councillor Culver. There is actually a condition recommended in respect of a construction management plan, which would be used to secure appropriate access for deliveries and construction materials. The highways officers would give the appropriate consideration to what was the correct access means for materials, deliveries, construction materials, construction traffic, amongst the detail of that construction management plan.
Okay, thank you. And just a second question, Chairman, if I may. Bearing in mind that, I mean, I know we're looking at this application, but bearing in mind the history of this, where an application for a replacement building was rejected and then they did it anyway. And there's also reference in here that there was a condition to restore an ancient hedge, which wasn't done. Would it be permissible, Mr. Till, for us to impose some sort of condition that would ensure that that ancient hedge was restored and that further attempts to undertake planning without permission could be restricted in some way? Is there some kind of recommendation we can give to the applicant that they shouldn't show such contempt for planning regulations in the future?
Thank you, Councillor. I've spoken before at some length about the fact that undertaking works without planning permission might be unauthorised, but that is different from it being unlawful. There is the right under the planning legislation to apply for works retrospectively. There is also the right for the authority to take enforcement action about works that have been undertaken in an unauthorised fashion and are considered to have resulted in material harm. So no, there is no condition that we could apply to a planning permission that puts some sort of warning in place regarding unauthorised works. But the authority could certainly review any unauthorised works to arrive at a decision whether those works merited formal enforcement action. In respect of reinstatement of an ancient hedge, as that doesn't fall to the consideration of the works that are currently before you, members, I would suggest that that would be imposing an unreasonable and unnecessary condition on any planning permission, and as such would fail to meet with the tests set out in the MPPF, which are the requirements of conditions, so would be highly susceptible to appeal and costs.
Thank you. One last request. Any more? Councillor Cole, your hand's gone down, so you had your question answered. Thank you. Now, very quickly, members, any questions of Mr. Goddard, please? No, we're all quite happy. Councillor Cole, you're deliberating there. Yeah, I thought you did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a silly question, really, Mr. Goddard, but one of the objectors mentioned parking outside the settlement boundary, but I assume that's irrelevant because people park outside settlement boundaries all the time, don't they?
Chairman, that is correct. It's not as if it's a physical structure or anything. It's still open, and that's not really an issue that highway officers would necessarily engage with. Maybe more for my planning colleagues, but no, we've no objection to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Right, members, we now come to the debate. If I could just sort of give a little bit of advice. We've gone down a lot of discussion on the parking aspect. Don't forget, we do have quite a considerable extension here, which is the majority, the main part of this application this evening. So keep an open mind on the application as a whole, not just on the aspects that we've taken to task on the questions of our officers. So who'd like to start the debate? We do. Councillor Vickers. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a really unique application, and I felt I really had to visit the site yesterday after our meeting, Chairman, because I couldn't really get my head around the front elevation, the back elevation. What's this parking doing? I'm glad I did. And, you know, that was what I was going to ask Mr. Goddard, but Councillor Barney got him first. I'm quite relaxed about this, actually, but I'll wait and hear what others think. I think the key issue is the parking space, and it is access by that farmer to his fields. But to my mind, that's a private matter between the owner of the land, i.e. the applicant, and any other people who have a private right to access their fields through that track. But I am concerned that we really look carefully at the construction management plan, and I'm glad to see that it's a pretty detailed one, because whether this job goes ahead or not depends on that. It's an extremely difficult site to access. I can't see the builder really getting materials to the site other than up that track with heavy vehicles, probably. It's just a muddy track once you get off the bottom, and that steep turn. I mean, the order in which the works will be done, those parking spaces are going to have to be the last item that gets built, and yet we've got a condition, quite rightly, that says the development shall not be occupied until it is built. And so you'll be presented with a fait accompli, with a building ready to occupy, parking spaces that now are going to be built, and then possibly an argument with a a farmer who can't now access his fields. And then you'll have another application coming in to waive a condition on parking or something like that. This is, you know, I've seen the history of this site and we have a problem, but frankly, the rest of it, I don't have a problem with. The conservation officers quite right. When you go there, you can barely see the application site from the road or anywhere else in the public view. I would like one slight tweaking to that construction management plan if we're minded to approve it, Chairman, and that is to specifically mention the public right of way, because I think that's quite a popular public right of way. And whether you access the site from the street up the public right of way where it joins the street, or whether you access it during the construction via the track, I think the users of that public right of way, which is a public highway like a road actually in legal terms, needs to be protected, and it needs to be explicitly mentioned in the construction management plan how they're going to do that without a wretched path closure, because too often we get an application which doesn't mention closure of a right of way, and then oops, suddenly the builder decides he needs to close the public right of way. So that's my piece, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. That is very, very useful. Councillor Culver.
I think Councillor Barnett might have been before me, Chairman.
Carry on, please. You're on
okay. Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, there's just, I mentioned before when I questioned Mr. Till, I was just wondering if we can be a bit clearer about conditions regarding the track and making sure the track is left in good order afterwards if it is used for construction materials. So I think we need to be quite explicit about that because it is very narrow and there are trees there. And I think reference has been made to protecting them against compaction and so on, and how far the roots come out underneath. And I think in condition 10, it talks about tree protection along the track, but I don't think it explicitly mentions around the parking spaces. So I think we need a clear condition that the trees around the parking spaces are protected as well during the construction process. And regarding the parking, I mean, to be honest, I think it is welcome that they have now made provision for 2 parking spaces off of the road, because that road is very bad. There's poor visibility. It's a very tight corner. And as was mentioned in the report, you know, you have to wait to look ahead of you, or you have to put your foot down to get past a long row of cars. So I think it's good that the applicant has now made provision for those 2 spaces, but just the conditions regarding the path and the car parking spaces with regard to trees are my 2 concerns, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. We'll move on to Councillor Barnett now.
Well, Chairman, I think some of the points have already been made by Councillor Vickers, but I mean, I'm reasonably relaxed regarding the application, but I still have some sort of reservations regarding this construction phase. And I know Councillor Culver has addressed it initially in the question early on. I can only foresee a 4-wheel drive vehicle accessing the rear of that property, and most of the local construction materials are delivered by just standard 7-ton upwards vehicles, and I think that they would have some difficulty. I think in another scenario, it could be a case that a vehicle would park obviously in the high street, and then a hydraulic grab would lift the materials over the next door neighbour's garden into the back of treetops. That obviously would not be acceptable, but that's only way that I can foresee happening in that direction. And also, I know we're not looking at the need necessary for the extension, but if we do look at the elderly or infirmed, how does one access that property via emergency services? I'd have some concern there, because there's no way that I would want to try and assist anybody up that very steep gradient footpath, and by Joe, it is steep at the front of the property. So overall, I can't see how we can necessarily refuse the application, but it does. The applicant does need to address several points here.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Very good. Councillor Abbs, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. To be honest, I would have preferred, given the uncertainty with which some of the information was presented back to the councillors, to have asked to defer this while we got accurate details on it. But I'll see how the vote goes. I'm not going to make that as a proposal. I'm fairly uncomfortable, but probably I can't think of a clear reason why we could object to it. So, but for some reason I'm uncomfortable about going for it. But I'd rather have had the full detail, is all I'm saying, really, and I don't seem to have got it. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. We're looking at conditions here generally. I think we're generally happy, aren't we, with the design, not too much worried about the size and the placement of this extension. My input as such would be I am concerned slightly about the gradient. I am slightly concerned, and maybe somebody would like to elaborate on this and consider this as a condition, but I think we might be considering, are we not, some sort of a construction method statement or even some sort of a construction plan with regards to, and Mr. Goddard, I'll take advice from you on this, that for the parking space, because if I haven't seen this incline, I must admit, but if it is as we are suggesting here, there's going to be need of some sort of soil retention, a wall, or maybe even a reinforced wall of some sort, and it could be on two sides, the left-hand side and the rear. My concern is that if it's an incline and we do get to this situation of maybe a wall on the right-hand side, this does most definitely then start providing an obstacle for, as Councillor Vickers has said, this is a right of way as such, vehicles to go up there. It could be an encumbrance of access. We might consider that. I do have Councillor Abbs, your hand is still up. I've got Councillor Cole and thank you. I am looking for a proposer, but before I do that, if we could just consolidate these conditions, because I don't want conditions added once I've got a proposer and seconder. So are we? I've got down here, obviously, we've obviously got issues of protecting the trees around the parking area from Councillor Culver, as along to issues of road closure issues, and obviously Councillor Culver again, conditions of restoring the track should agricultural vehicles go up there, and some consideration, I think, of certainly the construction of the parking areas. Anybody else got any conditions there they'd like to add for Mrs. Armour and Mr. Till to collate before we get a proposer and seconder, please? Or we can capture it. Councillor Abbs, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was mentioned, I think, by Councillor Culver about and I've read this as well, about the restoration of this hedge, and can we condition that in?
I think Mr. Till has advised us that we can't, but I'll ask him to come back on that.
Councillor, as I advised earlier, the hedge does not form part of the works applied for, and conditioning its reinstatement would be going beyond the works applied for. It would be unnecessary and unreasonable, in my view, for the purpose of the works applied for, so fail to meet with the tests of conditions specified in the MPPF and be vulnerable to appeal.
Therefore, not under the remit of this committee, but would it be one of enforcement at another juncture? Mr. Till.
Chairman, it's certainly something that I can raise with enforcement as a matter to investigate, but it may be more appropriate for the tree officer and countryside to investigate it, as it doesn't involve physical development work.
No, this committee has brought it to the attention, and I thank them for doing it. Okay, I'm now looking at Councillor Cole, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I see Councillor Culver's got a hand up, but I was going to propose that we accept officer recommendations, taking into account members' comments and the further conditions proposed.
Thank you very much. And do I have a second? I think I do with Councillor Culver. Your hand is up. Were you to propose or second that, or did you have something to say?
I just got very briefly, Chairman, you mentioned about restoration of the track. Can we say in terms of the ground of the track and the trees that surround it? Can we just clarify that, please? Thank you.
And your issues with regard to the tree, I mean, tricky one. If a lorry goes up there, it breaks the branches, what can one do? You're muted.
Sorry, Chairman. Yeah, if a tree was knocked down, if they could make sure that they replace it, so make good the actual ground of the track, so it's not, you know, all pitted and horrible, but also any trees that get damaged, if they could be replaced.
Mr. Till, not to put a condition on here that's not achievable. How do you protect the roots?
Thank you, Chairman. In actual fact, the tree protection conditions recommended by the tree officer can be tweaked in order to cover the matters that Councillor Cole was raising concerns regarding. I'm satisfied that we can also add a requirement for any trees to be that do become damaged to be replaced with specimens of a similar variety.
Thank you. I've got a proposer, Councillor Cole. Do I have a second?
Yeah, Chairman, I'm happy to second it. My only additional comment is that, yeah, I agree that in the combination of the construction management plan and the arboricultural method statement, we will probably cover this. But I think we are, as you said yourself, Chairman, talking about a substantial bit of engineering, you know, retaining. And I think there needs to be a drawing somehow in the public domain at some stage, for the local stakeholders, if you like, in this situation to see, as well as obviously officers signing it off.
Thank you.
I think subject to that, I'm happy to second it with those conditions.
I see Mrs. Armour has her hand up. I know what you're going to say. I was hoping with my statement, a construction method statement and a plan for the construction of the retaining soil. I managed to get that condition in before Councillor Vickers mentioned it after he seconded the motion, but I take your advice.
No, that's not what I was going to say. I'm quite happy to add a condition if the proposer and seconder agrees with it. What I was going to say is, and it may well be why Mr. Goddard's got his hand up, is whether we actually need a separate condition to deal with a plan for the parking spaces or the gradient. And I don't know if that's something members with Mr. Goddard want to discuss.
Thank you. Mr. Goddard, over to you.
Chairman, I support that. I was going to say, within any normal construction management plan, there's always a plan included within it showing where materials are delivered and parking for contractors' vehicles, etc. But I would propose also a separate condition to that, which would basically detail the gradient in and around the proposed parking spaces and details of retaining structures.
Thank you.
Details be submitted prior to commencement.
Thank you. Mrs. Legg, you've managed to draft that. Mrs. Armour, you've managed to draft that.
Yeah, as long as Councillor Cole is happy with that as the proposer.
Yes. Councillor Cole as a proposer. Yep. It's grown legs. It's grown legs since the outline was put forward, and I thank you for that additional information to secure that. Therefore, I do have a proposer, Councillor Cole, and a seconder, Councillor Vickers, and Mr. Till and Mrs. Armour. You're quite happy with those conditions as we have discussed, and therefore the recommendation is for Head of Planning and Countryside be authorised to grant the planning permission for treetops at Hampstead Norris for this extension and parking. So if I could ask Mrs. Armour please to conduct the name vote. Thank you.
Okay, so this is for approval. Councillor Abbs.
Against.
Councillor Barnett.
For approval.
Councillor Bennyworth.
For approval.
Councillor Cant.
For.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Culver.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
For.
Councillor Wollaston.
For.
Councillor Hooker.
For.
Okay, so that's 8 for and 1 against.
Thank you very much. That application is approved. As requested by Councillor Cole, we're going to have a comfort break. How long would you like, Councillor Cole? We're doing very well. It's 8:30. Would you like 10 minutes?
I think 10 minutes maximum, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Break is necessary. Thank you.
Members, when you are comfortable, if you'd like to return, Mr. Shard, if you could put us in a rest mode. Thank you.
Yeah, for 10 minutes. Yeah. Let me know, Chairman, when you're ready to recommence. You're muted, Chairman, at the moment.
Thank you. Everybody's in?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Shard. Welcome back, everyone. And we'll now move on to the second half of this meeting, and that's the second application before us, which is application number 20/02630, House at Gallants View, Lower Green, Inkpen. This is on page 101 of your agenda, and the proposal is for revised proposals for a replacement entrance porch, internal alterations, and external and extension to accommodate and relocate a kitchen with a dining area with additional bedroom and family bathroom. Again, this has come to committee due to 10 letters of objection from the public. And Mr. Till is to do the presentation on this application as well. Mr. Till, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen. Chairman, can you see my shared screen?
Thank you, Mr. Till. I can.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, this application is for a single-storey and part two-storey extension and entrance porch to Gallants View, a traditional two-storey dwelling in Inkpen. The application has been brought before the committee due to receiving more than 10 letters of objection. Your officer's recommendation is for approval. The matters raised in objection are as follows: concerns with overdevelopment and impact on the AONB, impact on the character and appearance of the dwelling and Inkpen, the scale of the extensions being out of keeping with the existing dwelling, concerns regarding the building line, concerns with overlooking of neighbouring dwellings, impact on levels of light to neighbouring dwellings, detriment to the historic character of the building, concerns regarding construction traffic and potential obstruction of the adjacent right-of-way, which is located to the south of the dwelling between Gallants View and the southern dwelling there. The existing dwelling, the application site is located in Inkpen, which does not have a settlement boundary, and in the North Wessex Downs AONB. And as mentioned, a public right-of-way runs alongside the site behind the dwelling, alongside the dwelling. The existing dwelling, Gallants View, has been assessed by the Conservation Officer, who's noted that it possesses a degree of local significance that merits it worthy of consideration as a non-designated heritage asset. And the application has been assessed in light of this consideration. The dwelling is a modest two-storey thatched cottage with a hipped roof. In considering whether the proposed works are acceptable, the case officer and conservation officer have assessed the scale, massing and appearance of the extension against the existing dwelling. The proposed works are considered to be of a sympathetic design with a complementary rather than matching choice of materials, as is established best practice when addressing works to structures with conservation value. The subservient ridge and cat slide roof being staggered back from the ground floor part of the extension gives the proposed works a well integrated and subservient appearance, while referencing back to the original rear elevation in terms of the angle of roof slopes, the bonnet hipped roof and the non-intervention with the original frame of the building. Members' objections raise a number of concerns in respect to the size of the extension and overdevelopment of the site. The extension would represent approximately a 65% increase in floor area and has a clear subservience to the existing dwelling. Your officer's view is that it would neither dominate nor intrude on surrounding views and would complement the host dwelling. As such, your officers support this design. In terms of concerns raised in respect to the impact on neighbouring amenity via overshadowing, overbearing or overlooking, the proposed works are set well back from the boundary with Holly Tree Cottage to the north, and due to the cat slide design of the roof and existing vegetation along this boundary, would not significantly impact on levels of light reaching the rear garden windows or rear windows of this dwelling. In terms of the impact on privacy of this dwelling, the location of the two-storey works would prevent a significant increase in overlooking between the extensions and the rear amenity space of Holly Tree Cottage due to what is a reasonably oblique angle between the two-storey works and that rear space. In respect of the dwelling to the south, Brook House, the case officer has noted that windows in the north elevation of this property are either secondary windows or serve bathrooms. No direct window-to-window relationship is proposed, and this elevation of Brook House faces onto the intervening public right-of-way and dense boundary vegetation. The proposed works do not raise significant concerns in terms of either loss of privacy or any overbearing impact. Objections also raise concerns in respect of intervention or obstruction of the public right-of-way during construction. Your officers note that the proposed works do not involve works to the public right-of-way, and as such, this isn't a material consideration in this application. Public rights-of-way legislation controls obstructions to the right-of-way. In consideration of the wider issue of parking and storage, the site has ample space to accommodate both. However, conditions are recommended in respect of tree protection and arboricultural methodology in order to protect the mature vegetation along the boundary that contributes to the amenity of the area and the right-of-way. Turning finally to your update sheet, this notes an additional objection and a letter of support. These raise only one new issue, that a planning application is under consideration for extensions at Holly Tree Cottage to the north. As the case officer has noted on the update sheet, this isn't a material planning consideration, as planning permission hasn't been granted for any works to the neighbouring dwelling. Members, subject to the conditions set out in your officer's in the report, your officer's recommendation is for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Right, we're all back together again. We still have Mr. Goddard with us. Mr. Goddard, any observations on this one, or as it's in the rear, no consideration here?
Chairman, we've no objection to it. The site is quite spacious. There is sufficient parking within the site. The access is unchanged. No objection.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Right, we now move on to the written submissions from the public, and on this occasion we have no submission from Inkpen Parish Council, but we do have a submission from an objector, and this I will ask Mrs. Legg to read out. Now, this submission is from a Mr. Peacock on behalf of the residents that we've just heard about, Holly Tree Cottage, the neighbouring property. So, Mrs. Legg, if we could hear Mr. Peacock's submission, please. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman. So, share with you. Hopefully that's big enough, but not.
That's fine.
Too
Thank
big.
you. Members happy with that? Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So this is from me, Mr. Peacock, on behalf of the objectors. I submit this letter to notify the committee of my client's objection. The council statements have not been quoted due to the specific word count. However, I am willing to discuss this during the committee. Size and scale. This application is outside of the settlement boundary and thus must comply with policy C6. Application 19/01624/house validates that the proposed size of the extensions is contrary to policy C6. This is emphasised in the parish council's objections, in which they conclude overdevelopment. Character. The council's assessment states that as the ridge height and the size are subservient, then the proposal is acceptable. As above, we argue that this is not the case. However, policy C6 states that the scale of the enlargements has to be subservient, as to not impact the character of the existing dwelling. In relation to this specific dwelling, the proposed addition is detrimental to its character, contrary to policy C3. This building is thatched and visible from a public footpath, making its character important within the local identity. An increase of 77% in volume ensures that the thatched character of the dwelling will be diminished at this size no longer complementary. Therefore, I disagree with the statement made within the Council's case at 6.4. In addition, it is confirmed in paragraph 6.4 that there is a discrepancy between the measurements provided by the applicants and the Council. The large scale combined with the proposed materials has a detrimental impact on the character of the building. The AONB and the neighbouring footpath conflicting with 1, 2 and 3 of Policy C6. This further conflicts with ADPP 5, Policy CS19, Policy ENV 18 and Policy ENV 24C of the WBDLP. No special circumstances are proposed to validate this impact. Existing complies with space standards whilst the building has already been modernised. The proposal states in 6.4 that the development is clearly visible from the footpath, thus out of character in regard to design as mentioned above. The proposed materials are not matching in relation to a non-designated heritage asset, conflicting with paragraph 189 and 196 of the NPPF. Amenity, the two-storey part of the extension contains a height of 6.9 metres and protects by 6.3 metres. The Council states that given modest eaves height, the additional shadow cast would fall largely within the application site. The impact of overshadowing is relevant from the proposed ridge height. Even with the separation distance, the significant height will have an impact, especially from the ground floor kitchen. Misleading, inaccurate information. Within the support letter, which is acknowledged by the officer, it states that my client plans to implement a similar extension. This is incorrect because the proposal only has a projection of 1.5 metres. Misleading figures. Volume is larger, eaves height used for the amenity assessment. The planning officer has not visited the site, failing to see the detrimental impact on character, AONB and neighbouring amenity. Parish Council objection is valid. That's the end of the submission, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Wagg. Members, do you have any questions of Mr. Peacock? If you could put your hand up, thank you. We do. Mr. Shard, would you be kind enough to invite Mr. Peacock into the meeting, please? Good evening, Mr. Peacock. Welcome.
Good evening.
We can hear you and we can see you. You've heard the meeting up to now. You've heard the presentation from Mr. Till, and we've heard your submission. We did have some questions of you. The first one is Councillor Bennyworth.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Peacock. In your submission 1.10 relating to the building having already been modernised, can you please explain your comment there? Can you flesh it out for us, please?
Yes. One of the reasons why the council stated that it's in need of an extension is to modernise the building. However, the owners of the building have made additions to the kitchen. They knocked down an interior wall and implemented a brand new kitchen, dining room area. So therefore, internally, the building is quite modernised at this stage already. So therefore, it leads me to argue that there's no need for modernisation internally in this building. This building is sufficient. It meets all the space standards, and therefore it's applicable in that manner. Therefore, the only modernising really that would be required is externally. And I would argue that these external changes would have a detrimental impact on the character of the building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bennyworth. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Sam, could you mentioned about shadowing. It's a fairly broad statement. What any times of year? Can you expand on it, please? What times of year and what kind of lengths for how long? Any details that you can share?
Yep. The cottage itself is north of the site, so therefore it's at prime orientation to be shadowed. So therefore, a large addition of the height, which is 6.3 meters or 6.9 meters in height, sorry, the two-story extension, that's a drastic increase in height, which at this orientation is going to cast a very large shadow. Currently, there is hedging and vegetation, so I understand that this does screen Holly Tree Cottage from the proposal, but the height of 6.9 meters exceeds that of the existing hedge, and the existing hedge already overshadows the kitchen window on the ground floor of Holly Tree Cottage currently at this stage. And the proposed extension is going to extend the height even further and cast an even larger shadow over the property to the north.
Are you happy with that, Councillor? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Peacock. In 1.4 of your statement, character, the final clause says, however, policy C6 states that the scale of the enlargement has to be subservient as to, quote, not impact the character of the existing dwelling. Well, I've got policy C6 in front of me, and 0.4.49 says the relationship with the existing dwelling is key. The scale, height and massing of an alteration or extension should appear subservient to the existing dwelling. There are no rules that can be applied to an acceptable size of an extension, as each application is to be considered on the basis of the impacts on the particular property in that location. There is no reference to the not to impact the character of the existing dwelling. So where have you got that information from? Have you got policy C6 in front of you? Because I have.
I've got the quote from policy C6, which I took, which states, as quoted, the scale of the enlargement is subservient to the original dwelling and is designed to be in character with the existing dwelling. That's the quote that I have. I can look up policy C6 just to double check that. Give me 1 second.
Councillor Cole, you've managed to mute yourself. You're back up now.
Sorry, he's policy C6.1 is absolutely right, but I was looking at the supporting text, which gives much more detail and nuance to the policy, which has obviously been overlooked. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Barnett.
Through you, Chairman. Mr. Peacock, I was intrigued with your comment relationship to a non-attendance planning officer. I was just wondering why you made that reference in your submission.
Yep, I think it's important to make that reference, as the impact on the character from the proposal is hard to envisage without visiting the site. I understand that the extensions are subservient in regard to scale and so forth, but I think that the important thing to consider with this application is that the size of the extensions and the fact that they are non-matching in materials, these factors combined create an extension which has a drastic impact on the character of the dwelling and the area that is in. I mean, to play devil's advocate, I would argue that a smaller extension with a tiled roof, would be acceptable and not impact the character of the building in the area, whilst maybe a larger extension similar to the one proposed here with a thatched roof would also not detach from the character. But when you look at policy C6, as stated, the scale of the enlargement is subservient to the original dwelling and is designed to be in character with the existing dwelling. When you combine the large size of the extension and the fact that the materials are not matching, I think that this does have a detrimental impact on the character of the dwelling, the area, and also sets a precedent moving forward for other thatched dwellings in the area as well. So I think that this would have been understood more if the council officer had visited the site and could see this and could see the impact that an extension would have. And I think that's an important consideration that needs to be made.
Thank you, Mr. Peacock.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Peacock.
Mr. Peacock, this is subjective, of course, whether it is subservient or not. I mean, the conservation officer, a professional conservation officer, has made her judgment, and you, as presumably agent and architect or whatever, have your opinion, and this is what this committee is here for this evening, to deliberate on your thoughts and on the conservation officer's reports as well. I will ask Mr. Till later when we get to that as to what happened with regard to an officer visiting. We've obviously got photographs, whether it was the officer or a photographer. I will ask him clarification on that point. Members, any more questions of Mr. Peacock? I do not have any more hands up. Mr. Peacock, thank you very much this evening for your submission, and thank you for attending the meeting, and thank you for the way that you answered the questions put to you. Mr. Shard, if you could kindly escort Mr. Peacock back into the waiting room for the rest of this submission. Thank you. He's gone. Thank you. Right, we move on. We have no written submissions supporting this application, but we do have one from the applicant, and this is Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Mr. Shard, if you could invite Mr. and Mrs. Bennett in, please. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Legg. You've got to read it out first. I do apologise.
Yes, Chairman. So this is, as you say, for Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. We are pleased that West Berkshire Council's committee report recommends that planning permission be granted. We accept the report and the conditions it recommends. We rely upon it, our heritage statements, response letter, and the 2 third-party letters in support of our application. This modest extension turns our much-loved historic 2-bedroom home into a 3-bedroom one. Our young children will have small separate bedrooms. We will have 1 small bathroom upstairs and a standard-sized kitchen diner downstairs. A generous garden at the back will remain, as will the front garden and driveway. We have sought to take all reasonable steps to achieve as appropriate a proposal as possible, including instructing architects whom we understand are known and respected by WBC and a specialist heritage consultant. We are pleased that WBC recognises that the heritage aspects of our home are safeguarded as the Conservation Officer concludes. Our proposal fits with the nature and character of Inkpen and Lower Green. See also HS 7.1-9 and page 8-9. Our proposal fits with the proportions of the site our property sits upon. See also RL pages 3 and 4. And the current property is not in keeping with modern standards, and that our proposal addresses this in an appropriate and sympathetic manner. Neither Inkpen Parish Council nor any objector suggests that our extension will be obtrusively visible from any angle by the road or from the front. It will only be able to be viewed when directly adjacent to it from the footpath and from the garden of our immediate neighbour, Holly Tree Cottage. Its impact is minimal. See RL pages 2 to 4 and the report. Our other immediate neighbour, Brook House, does not object to this application. On the objections, we agree with the clear and thorough reasons in the report for the non-sustainability of all the objections. We note that no expert or professional evidence has been submitted by IPC or by lay objectors to provide an evidential base to justify the assertions underpinning their objections. We are particularly disappointed in IPC's 11th hour reversal of their original no objections decision, with its seeming reliance upon urgent information, which had no evidential basis and which the planning officer in the report is content, in her professional opinion, to discount. We genuinely feel that the number of objections received lies in surreal disproportion to the sympathetic extension we have sought to achieve, planned with the assistance of careful professional help. We cannot speculate as to why that is. Living in and caring for a heritage property is important to us, as is living in the beautiful semi-rural setting of Inkpen, which is home. We wish for our cottage to remain and appear part of the fabric of the village, and believe our proposal, as WBC acknowledge, will achieve this. We hope you will support our sincere application to extend our home. That's the end of the submission.
Thank you, Mrs. Legg. Members, we do. Jolly good. Thank you. Well done, Councillor Vickers. Saves my embarrassment of being a little bit over enthusiastic to invite Mr. and Mrs. Bennett in. Mr. Shard, could you invite them in, please? Good evening, Mr. Bennett. You're on your own, or do you have Mrs. Bennett with you?
I am with my wife, but we can't get our 1-year-old to sleep. So
okay. Well, I think we all appreciate that situation. We do have a question for you, and it's from Councillor Vickers. Thank you, Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Bennett, I'm a keen rambler, and when I visited the site, I did take the opportunity to walk down that public footpath. And I noticed the hedge, and you say in your statement that that is going to be, your extension will be viewed from there, but with the hedge or without it was my question really. Are you intending to keep the hedge, which will obscure the extension largely, or are you going to remove it, which will actually widen the path but enable people walking down the path to view your beautiful extension?
Our plan is that the hedge is retained.
Okay, thank you. I mean, is that something you're keen to secure, or would you not really care either way? Because it does occur to me that it might be rather difficult to retain the hedge while building the extension.
No, we understand that, but I think our plan was it would have to be replanted or re-put in, and
I see.
Okay,
thank you.
That's going to be the case.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Bennett. Can you tell me, please, have you discussed your proposals with the residents at Holly Tree Cottage who are objecting to it?
I think our intentions that we were always hoping to extend were made very clear when we moved in a couple of years ago, and even when those initial noises were made, the response back was very clear that there may be some difficulties. I'm certainly aware that a similar process was undergone by the property on the other side to them. I don't know the whole score about that, but I think it was always anticipated that whatever was proposed, in my personal view, and I accept it's all subjective, it was likely to prove difficult to reach any form of consensus.
Thank you for that diplomatic response, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett, on that. Councillor Bennyworth.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Bennett.
Good evening.
Overlooking has been mentioned in some letters of representation as being an issue. What steps have you taken to minimise?
Well, I suppose we don't think there could be any prospect of overlooking in the proposal we have put forward. And for example, thinking about the second floor, there are only, I think, planned to be 3 windows on the second floor. 2 of those windows, one in a hallway and one in the bathroom, are going to be skylights looking at the roof and nothing else. The only other window is going to be the bedroom at the very end, and that is not going to be overlooking any property. It's just going to be looking out into our garden. I don't see there's any prospect of overlooking from any other window. We've got some ground floor windows, but they're just looking into our garden, and our neighbours put in a new fence, and we've got the high hedge this summer anyway. So I personally don't think there's any prospect of overlooking. I mean, I would add we've proposed the extension where it is to be minimally disruptive as possible to our neighbours. I mean, we don't think we could put it at the front because conservation would obviously have some difficulties with that, and we couldn't put it on the other side of the house because then there really would be difficulties with our neighbours. So we felt we would perhaps being as considerate as possible in what we sought to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Actually, just whilst I have you here, Inkpen is very protective of its dark skies. Is there any if there were a condition possibly on outside lighting, would that be something you might consider?
It's not something I'd thought about, but certainly one of the reasons we're here is that we value the dark sky, and I don't think we would want to do anything that disrupted that.
Okay, no, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Bennett, as the evening progresses and we get to debate this, you've mentioned tonight that there are skylights in the roof. One of the things that we might be asking questions of is of the bathroom and the landing or hall, whatever it is, with these skylights. Are they openable? I can't remember reading the documentation whether they're obscured. Can you just enlighten us on those? They're not habitable rooms, let's put it that way.
I don't have the precise details of the skylights at my fingertips, but I suspect they probably are. At least one of them is likely to be openable, but I don't think, as I understand it anyway from our architect, they're likely to be openable in any sort of meaningful angle that is going to give any cause for overlooking, if that is where the the question is directed towards.
A perfectly acceptable answer. Thank you. Everybody quite happy? Yep. Jolly. No more hands up. Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming along this evening. I hope you managed to get the baby to sleep. And I'll ask Mr. Shard to escort you back to the waiting room, and we will progress with this application. Thank you very much for your submission and coming along this evening. Good. Right, now we come on to our ward member, and this evening we do have a representation. Councillor James Cole, if you could invite him in, please, Mr. Shard. Good evening, Councillor Cole. Now, I am slightly embarrassed that my stopwatch has given up on me. I do have someone who rides shotgun, and it is Mrs. Armour, and she's got it prepared. I knew she would do. So you're going to get your direction from Mrs. Armour this evening, should you need 5 minutes. We look forward to hearing your presentation. And when you're ready, Councillor Cole, and Mrs. Armour's ready. Have I got the thumbs up from Mrs. Armour? I have. When you're ready, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's hope I don't need the 5 minutes. Our colleague Councillor Rolls has opted not to speak as ward member on this application. She's not been able to make a site visit. We are very much aware there's the case often in our area. A site visit does make a considerable difference, as Mr. Peacock has observed. You've heard the objections of the immediate neighbour converted to direct comparison with our policies by their consultant. I feel the evidence offered is rather overwhelming. Chairman, you won't want me to duplicate that level of detail, so I won't. You've seen the photographs. Those included come only from the applicant and the immediate neighbour. For those from the latter, there are 2 included showing Bridgman's, the property on the other side, the north side of the neighbouring property, Holly Tree Cottage. I'm at a loss to see the relevance of these as to why they were included, if meant to evidence approval of this application. What is not shown is what you do see on arrival. The fact that Gallant's view is set higher than the neighbouring property, Holly Tree Cottage. I'm not experienced enough to estimate it properly, but to me, the difference is between half a metre and a metre. This does have implications for loss of light in winter and for overlooking the Holly Tree Cottage garden. While our report says the first floor windows are therefore not considered to result in any unacceptable overlooking of neighbouring properties, equally, unfortunately, the photos selected don't show the view from Holly Tree Cottage garden. To my mind, the proposed windows on the side, whatever is being said, would clearly or could clearly impinge on the privacy of the Holly Tree Cottage garden. Depends how they're done. The angle is not oblique enough to stop this. Interestingly, the pictures of the extension to Bridgman's, which was reduced to a single-storey extension, do show that while they damage the view from Holly Tree Cottage, perfectly acceptable under English planning law, the result does not damage privacy. And as that cottage is to the north, there's no effect on light to Holly Tree Cottage. Maybe a different story with this application. This does show, as far as I'm concerned, the reliance on photos during this pandemic is problematic when the selection is solely down to officers who are not permitted by planning management to make a visit. It's not the fault of our planning officers. They simply cannot possibly see the full picture. The screening gets a mention in the report. The mutual boundary between Gallant's View and Holly Tree Cottage is well screened by a tall and mature hedge. In reality, that hedge has rather obviously been allowed to grow out in recent times. It appears thin in parts down below. I don't think one can rely on that hedge as long-term permanent screening. Reference to the Parish Council changing its collective mind. I spoke to the Chairman this afternoon. I'm clear that the issues here were not obvious to the Parish Council at first sight. When additional information was supplied and explained, there was legal justification for the parish to change its mind and object, primarily on grounds of overlooking privacy and loss of light. That other aspect of light, Councillor Bennyworth mentioned the subject of dark skies. Inkpen has for a long time had a dark skies policy. It's not just a question of the construction period, as referred to in our report, but restriction of long-term external lighting. It's not a new thing. I do request clear restriction on external lighting of this to go through, and I get the impression that the applicant would be perfectly happy with that. So I asked this committee not to approve this application unchanged. As well as the external lighting, I certainly, if you find that you have to put it through, I would suggest obscured glass in those side windows.
30 seconds.
And I've just reached the end.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you, Chairman.
And well-experienced presenter, Councillor Cole, right to the minute or to the second. Members, do we have any questions? We do. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, Councillor Cole. I'm not sure. I'm like yourself. I'm a bit surprised at the lack of our own evidence here. Do you concur, as I have done, that on page 125 of the pack, that these photos are actually from Holly Tree Cottage, are provided by the residents at Holly Tree Cottage? Is the first question.
Oh yes.
Have you got the?
But they provided lots of photographs, and what surprised me were the ones that were selected, because they're not the ones that show the problem, as it were. That's what I was unhappy with.
So that's what led me to another question, which how many photos are missing? But I certainly saw in the objection letters that there is reference that photos were sent, and I assume these were the only two that have been sent. Or are you now saying that that's not the case?
I can't answer the question as to how many were sent, because I didn't ask that question when I went to see these people this morning. I haven't been involved in this until very recently. But I mean, the first thing I saw on arrival was it was obvious that you could photograph the difference in heights. Unfortunately, our rules do not permit me to show you that photograph. Such is life.
No, but we can take your word, I think, as a councillor, that there is a difference in height, and that the Holly Tree Cottage is lower than the other one. Is that correct? By half a metre to a metre, I think you said, or
somewhere between the two. I'm just not experienced enough to go further than that.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs.
Thank you. That's really, yeah.
Members of the committee, any more questions of Councillor Cole? I see no more hands up. No. Councillor Cole, thank you for your submission.
Thank you.
Mr. Sharp, over to you to escort Mr. Cole back to the waiting room. Thank you. Members, we now come on to questions of Mr. Till. Mr. Till, I have a question for you with regards to site visits. Have you got any comments on that one, please? And in fact,
yeah.
Photographs and the photographs while it's been brought up.
Yes, I do have comments on both of those matters, Chairman. Thank you. Members, in respect of site visits, as I've reminded the committee previously, the government has placed a duty on officers and committees of the council in order to go about the business of planning in the best possible manner that we can, taking account of the current national pandemic emergency situation. The government and the council are both of the opinion that the business of planning can continue effectively, and as part of the measures to protect the safety of both officers, members and members of the public, that means that site visits can't currently go ahead. However, we have been operating on the procedure of using photographic evidence, plans supplied by the applicant and information supplied by the applicant and other interested parties in order to go about assessing planning applications. I politely refute Councillor Cole's suggestion that it isn't possible to make an assessment of the application in front of you on the basis of the comprehensive detailed information that you've been provided with. In respect to the photographs that have been provided, Councillor Cole is correct that the case officer has provided a selection of photographs. Those are taken from various different viewpoints, the viewpoints that are considered most appropriate for the purpose of evidencing the impact of the works on the site. In respect of the change in levels mentioned by Councillor Cole, I'm currently looking at a photograph on my screen, which to my practiced eye appears to show the difference in levels between the two sites. As you can see, there is a bank of, I would have said, approximately between 50 and 75 centimetres, indicating a slight incline to levels. So I don't agree that that is instrumental at all in preventing the accurate assessment of the site. I think the case officer's report does a detailed and comprehensive job of providing the information that members need to make a determination on these matters. And in respect of the completeness of photos, as I understand it, the case officer secured permission from the objector at Holly Tree Cottage to publish all photos that were provided by that objector, and it's my understanding that those were published on the council's website. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Till, going back to the photographs again, members don't go into the detail of who provided what, and certainly in the way of photographs. Obviously, it's being used as a slight argument one way or the other in this case. Is it something we consider to say these photographs haven't been taken by a planning officer, these have been provided by a third party? Now, if it's come from an objector and we don't know it, it might just not be quite fair to the case, but I leave that with you.
Chairman, the approach taken by planning officers is to try to present a well-rounded overview of issues for members. It's correct that those photographs have been provided by the objector, but they're not considered to be biased information in any way and are very much in the spirit of information that members might be able to gather on a site visit if they were to be able to make one at present. So in the spirit of completeness of information, I think that it's perfectly reasonable for those photographs to be presented and fair to both the objector and the applicant.
Thank you. Councillor Cant.
Thank you, Chair. So Simon, just clarification really. Councillor Cole mentioned the view from the footpath. I'm not sure that the view from a footpath of a proposed development is a relevant planning consideration, is it?
Well, thank you, Councillor Cant. We are in the North Wessex Downs AONB, and public views in any case are of great import in assessing the visual impact of work. We would usually, as planning officers, treat a public right of way to be one of those public views.
Okay, thank you. Just supplement, so in a sense, what you can see from the footpath is not as relevant as the access. So the other issue I just wanted to raise with you briefly was, I'm very slightly confused now about the fact that the parish council have not made objections, then made an objection, and we've had nothing in writing, or where are we on that? I got slightly lost about whether they object or didn't object and how.
Thank you, Councillor. First of all, can I just clarify that the views from the public right of way are just as important in assessing an application as the views from any other public viewpoints, such as the highway adjacent to the access, for example. Secondly, in respect to the parish council's objection, as I understand it, what occurred is that the parish council submitted their response of no objections first of all, and then I'm advised by the parish clerk that a second vote was taken by the parish that unfortunately at this present time hasn't been minuted, but those minutes are going to be reviewed because that's an error.
Thank you, Simon.
And that vote was reported in their revised objection to the proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Abbs, I see your hand up. I don't know if it was supposed to be up for a second or not, but yeah, okay. I've got Councillor Bennyworth first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Till. Mr. Till, I asked the question of the applicant about overlooking. Are you content there's no significant degree of overlooking?
Thank you, Councillor Bennyworth. There are two windows, according to the floor plans that I'm looking at, that face north, which are the windows to the bathroom and bedroom. And in terms of those windows and their location, because of what is effectively a reasonably side-by-side relationship of the second story part of the works and the adjacent property, and I'm just trying to find a slide to most appropriately exemplify this. Right. Just bear with me for a second. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so this darker grey patch is the second story extension. Can you see my cursor? Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bedroom window, which is the window that I would have concerns regarding any overlooking really aspect of this, is around where this arrow, the outline of proposed two-story extension, around where that arrow is. It is a roof light style window, but it's located such that views across the neighbouring property would be quite limited and certainly wouldn't overlook any windows. It would potentially somewhat overlook the private amenity space of the dwelling. My suggestion, members, if you have concerns in respect of overlooking arising from those northern windows, is that a condition requiring that those windows were obscure glazed and fixed shut except where above 1.7 meters of the room in which they served, which is a standard permitted development requirement. A condition requiring that would be sufficient to address any concerns in terms of impact on neighbouring amenity as far as overlooking is concerned. But my professional view is that the overlooking aspect will be extremely limited in this particular case.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Till. So just to clarify, there is no window-to-window contact between the two properties. Is that correct?
No, there's no window-to-window on either side of the extension.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, well, not finally, but next, Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Chairman. Please bear with me, Mr. Till, on this one a little bit. The first question is, what is the distance between the ridge line on the proposed extension and the start of the building that will be potentially affected by light? I'm going to be talking about light mainly. I did a quick, if it helps, I opened up maps and did a quick distance measure, and it seems to be about 10 or 11 meters. Would you concur?
Yeah, I don't have a specific distance in front of me, but knowing that the distance between the boundary and the side of the extension is 7 meters, I think that the 10 to 11 metres is approximately correct there, Councillor.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. So that leads me on to, I mean, it was been brought up that the issue of shadowing, and there is no shadow diagram that would have been very helpful here to show us through the winter months, which is the main time that would be affected. There is nothing that I'm not seeing, right? I had to do my own work on it. There's no shadow diagram been provided.
No, there isn't a shadow diagram with this.
Okay. So therefore, I must ask the fellow councillors to bear with me, because I use a thing called findmyshadow.com, so you know where I'm getting it from. And I looked at roughly mid-November through, and I stopped looking after about February. But certainly through the December timeframe, if we are talking about a 6.5 metre ridgeline, that would be extending the shadow in the region of 25 to 30 metres. And that's why I think it's very important that we have these type of things when we're looking at these type of applications, because as that moves around and during the time of day, that will cast a shadow not just across the house, but across quite a large portion of the garden. And we would then need to consider, would the loss of light for several months a year be a significant factor when we consider the application? Would you like to offer any comment?
Mr. Till.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you're correct in as much as a year-round light assessment is often requested in terms of planning applications. In this case, yes, you're identifying the darkest months of the year with the sun lowest, where shadows cast are generally long. However, if I took this to building control and asked them for a assessment of it, the building control assessment would generally be on the basis of levels of light throughout the whole of the year and the impact on them. And they would point out that it's very common for works with dwellings side by side during those darkest months of the year to have some level of light impact. But that level of light impact might not actually be significantly impacting on the amount of light reaching windows in the rear of the property. In this case, the direction that those windows in the rear of the property face is a material consideration. They do not face in the direction of the extension itself. Most of their light is gained as a secondary, effectively a reflected quality from the direction that the extension is. The main impact in terms of levels of light would be on the garden, and in the colder months of the year, one would expect to be using the garden somewhat less. In the warmer months of the year, it wouldn't, where the light impacts would be considerably less significant, one might expect to be using the garden more.
And finally, could you just confirm for me that the photographs I'm looking at on page 125 of the pack were provided by, I think it's almost clear, but it's definitely Hollow Tree Cottage, and that clearly shows in a December time frame, you know, a view that would be blocked by the extension. Am I correctly interpreting it?
If I just share my screen, are we talking about these photographs, Councillor Abbs?
Yes, indeed I am, yes.
No, I don't agree that that is a view that would be blocked by the extension. The part of the extension would be visible within that view, certainly, as I interpret it, which would mainly be the single-storey part of the extension. So I think you might be able to see, yes, the single-storey part of the extension, some of the two-storey part of the extension, but it wouldn't be, as far as I interpret that view, completely obscured.
Yeah, but I think, as the chairman has already pointed out, the fact that this is evidence from a third party and we have no site visit, no officer visit, we are led to or forced to make an assumption as opposed to being sure. Thank you very much, though, Mr. Till. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I note on page 112, we've got some conditions with regard to brickwork, saying it needs to match the existing brickwork. Is it within our powers to make the same requirement for all of the other materials? I note the front of the house uses some black timber slats. And also with regard to the windows, would we be able to say that the windows should match the windows in the existing property?
Just bear with me for a second, Councillor. I'm just having a look at the condition. Sorry, so is this on page 112, samples of materials?
Yes.
And new brickwork to match the existing. I mean, the conditions can be varied in order to make any of those materials matching to existing. There are materials shown on oh dear, sorry, my PowerPoint's just dropped out. Just bear with me for a second.
Chairman, it clearly states that it on page 112, 456, that and that details have got to be submitted. So yeah. I think that's probably answered Councillor Culver's question.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. You might confirm.
Yeah, point 4 says to match existing, but with regard to the windows and eaves and fascia, etc., it doesn't say to match existing. So I just wanted to clarify if we're able to do that for all of those aspects.
Yes, sorry, I perhaps seized on the wrong aspect of that question. Yes, you can amend the condition to require all detailing to be matching to the existing. Should that be necessary, Councillor?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Mr. Till, carrying on from Councillor Cant's point, this is with regard to Pen Parish Council having no objection at one time and then at another, of which we can't quite determine when it changed its opinion. Am I right in saying that they had the opportunity up to 48 hours before this meeting to ask and come and make a submission in objection to this council if they so felt strongly about it, and they didn't do it?
Yes, the Pen Parish Council would have received the standard correspondence inviting them to make a representation as a written submission and to attend in order to answer questions. Councillor Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you. Members, I don't think we've got anything from Mr. Goddard on this occasion. He had no objections. I've just quickly looked just so I don't go too quickly. No, you're clear, Mr. Goddard. I open it up to the debate, and Councillor Vickers, thank you again for opening the debate.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I said I did visit the site, it's quite a balanced one, this. It is quite a large extension. I think I could just accept it's subservient to the main building. It will, I think, change the character of the local environment to some extent, but as it's not a conservation, well, it's not a listed building, I think one goes with our professional conservation officer's advice on this. I do think we should have those that additional condition myself about the bedroom window. On the lighting side, I think the picture on page 125 shows that in the middle of the winter, even the hedge between the neighbouring property and Gallant's View is going to shadow a large part of the neighbour's garden. And given the additional 10, 11 metres away that the extension will be, I don't think that will have a significant difference, even for those 2 or 3 months of the year when the sun is that low. And as for obscuring the view significantly, again, it's going to slightly change the view from an angle from an upstairs window, but I wouldn't think that is anywhere near enough to make us wish to object. I don't think that would stand up personally. So I'm happy to hear what other people say, but the only other thing I would say is, as a rambler, as somebody going up public rights of way quite a lot, and I know this is a very well used path, I think again it's on balance acceptable. Even if that hedge doesn't stay, the advantage of removing the hedge is that you have a wider path where it's at its narrowest at the moment. And as Councillor Cole says, the hedge is not in a very good state. It's very leggy at the lower part. It's not being well maintained. So I don't think it's worth preserving, but if they want to plant another one, I guess this will be covered by the arboricultural condition that we have. All of that. So there's no particular tree preservation orders there, but some sort of a statement will have to be produced for the tree officer to approve, I imagine. So that's all I got to say. Not quite relaxed about it, really.
Thank you. Very good. Councillor Abbs.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'm sure Councillor Vickers won't mind me taking an opposite opinion on the night. That's what we're here to. What we're being asked to do here, because of a lack of evidence, is it isn't just a couple of hours for a couple of months. Even my own quick study using the tool I've mentioned shows impact from October through March. This is not just a day or two and an hour or two here and there. And because the lack of data, means that we're making an assumption. And if this had been a single story extension, I wouldn't have raised a peep, but it's not. It's a double story extension, and the ground being even only 75 centimeters lower, it means that 6.5 isn't 6.5, it's actually 7 point something, right? So that really brings me to conclude that I don't have enough evidence, and I would not be willing to let it go through as it is. As much as I'd love the family to have a third bedroom, that's I do have to think of the neighbouring properties around it, and that light impact. I'm a north-facing house myself, so when someone builds something through the in the wrong location, it really impacts your quality of life quite quickly. And we have a significant overshadowing issue potentially here, and we're thinking about approving something with conditions, whereas if we'd just had that diagram in the first place, we'd have been able to make a better and more informed choice. So I can't vote in favour of it on that ground and that ground alone. So I'd like to propose that we reject or defer until such time as that information comes forward to allow us to make a proper decision.
I'm sure Mrs. Armour will advise me here. We've got two proposals there. You can only have one, I'm afraid. You're muted.
I didn't take Councillor Vickers as a proposal, so I'll pause in case it did.
No, do we have a proposal or not on the table, or are you? What have you?
I'm proposing that we defer.
Oh, defer.
Whilst we get the right information. That would be my preference.
Now, I'm going to take a choice here. I mean, this is a very early decision, and it's not an approval or it's not a refusal, it's a deferral. And I'll put this to committee at this stage to see if there's any interest at all in a deferral for a second. If you could just raise your hands if you are in favour of a deferral. Councillor Abbs, I've taken that decision. Yes, you proposed, so I appreciate. You don't get a second, so unfortunately that doesn't stand at this stage, but thank you for your contribution. I will now move on, and we have Councillor Cant. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think two things have swayed me, one of which is we've had extraordinarily extensive discussion about this, and I think very fairly. And the second of which is in terms of being the custodians of the local issues about visibility and light and those things, the parish council seem to have chosen not to make a representation, which indicates to me they don't feel terribly strongly about it. So I'd like to table a proposal that we move swiftly to a vote on the recommendation of the planning officer.
Thank you. I'll wait until somebody comes forward. I won't prompt it. I'll let the discussion go forward, and I've got Councillor Barnett next.
Oh, sorry, Chairman. I thought Councillor Pennyworth, but don't worry.
You are right. You are right.
Okay.
You are right. I've got your name up, but I did write down Councillor Pennyworth first. I'm sure Councillor Pennyworth won't mind you going first.
Okay, all right. Well, it's strangely, I'm in this case feel slightly different than Councillor Abbs. On my visit on Sunday, both from the front and the roadway and the side, I was very apprehensive about this application completely. And tonight, during the discussions, I'm sort of feeling a little bit more reassured about it. So perhaps my view has actually changed. So to move things along, I'm more than happy to second Councillor Catt's proposal.
Thank you. So we have a proposer of Councillor Cant, and I have a second of Councillor Barnett. Over to you, Councillor Pennyworth.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to say that this is a very historically important part of Inkpen Village, which is why, for me, the Conservation Design Officer's statement is so important in this report. I think we have to remember that Inkpen isn't a museum piece. It's not preserved in aspic. It's a living, breathing, working village, and as such, it requires and has to have houses that are fit for modern use. And I think this will bring the house up to something like a modern standard. And I'm happy also to side with officer's recommendation on this.
Thank you, Councillor Pennyworth. I've no more hands up. As we sit on these committees, we gain experience, and I'm sure a few of us here will remember a very, very like application that came in with a thatched cottage with a very, very like extension at the rear. And not to put any weight on where that application went, but that does come to mind here. And as far as the practical aspect is concerned, and I know we're not interested in building and one thing how you actually achieve this, one of the biggest problems I'm sure we might appreciate is how you make something watertight when you've got a thatched roof and you're going to put tiles up against it. But that's not our problem this evening. So I do have a proposer, Councillor Cant, and I have a seconder for Councillor Barnett. And I just go back on the conditions. All I would like to say is, from a practical point of view, and I know as councillors we like to say, to pacify our neighbours either side and one thing or another. But if we're living in a house and we've got a bathroom, there's nothing worse than a bathroom that a window doesn't open. So I'd just like to propose that we give that some thought, that this window isn't totally closed, but we might say one can ajar it for a distance of 4 inches or whatever it is in metric. It is obscure, and the other window of the hallway, I'm quite happy, I don't know if you are, that is obscure. I know I've got a proposal and a seconder, and I'll take Mrs. Armour's advice on this, but I think we did go down the route that we'd like to think that these windows were closed and obscured. But I would just like how far we can go with this, Mrs. Armour, with regards to a bit of peace of mind in a bathroom, that we can let the steam out. I know we can put a fan in, but there's nothing better than a window that opens.
I think in terms of the actual wording of the condition, Simon's probably better placed. In terms of amending the proposal, that will obviously be up to the proposer and seconder. So if they're happy to agree what you're saying, then I don't have a problem from it in terms of the vote.
I'm perfectly happy with those.
I'm happy also,
Chair.
So I don't know if Simon's got any wording that they normally use in these situations that...
I believe that the window in question is a roof light,
yes, it is.
And therefore it would be my suggestion that the condition includes a restriction of limiting the amount that can be opened to, say, 20 centimetres would be about consistent with 4 inches. If the proposers are in agreement with that, and obscure glazed, and that it can be retained in accordance with those requirements.
Thank you. And I'll go back, if I may, to Councillor Culver's. You've got your hand up, Councillor Culver. Maybe you want to reiterate, make sure that Mrs. Armour and Mr. Till capture your observations on windows and soffits, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just regarding the glazing and the wooden timber as well, just to make sure that those match in the same way that point 4 specifies that brickwork should match. It actually uses the word match. I think we should use that with regard to the windows as well. It may be that the design is sort of slightly different, but I think it's important that, for example, that the surround of the windows at the front is white. So I think it should be specified the same for the back. So I know sometimes you get grey ones or whatever, and I think it ought to look uniform and at least have the same kind of approach.
Thank you. Anything else? No, you're happy. Councillor Benny, with your hand still up, you've got a contribution here.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just two points, if I could. We mentioned, didn't we, earlier about the ink pen dark skies policy. I was wondering if it's possible to make a condition around that, Mr. Till. And also, as far as the removal of permitted development rights, is that something that's in the report as a precondition, or is that something that we can add now? If Commissioner wanted to, of course.
Thank you, Councillor. In respect of lighting restrictions, I can require I can recommend a condition requiring that details of any associated external lighting for the extension are to be submitted and approved, including a Lux plan giving details of levels and lighting types. Sorry, can you repeat the other matter, Councillor Pennyworth?
Thank you. It was the removal of permitted development rights.
Removal of permitted development rights. I believe that those are actually subject to recommended condition 10, and that's in respect of extensions and outbuildings.
And that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to mention to members that there are emerging policies in both our new local plan and from the North Wessex Downs AONB with regard to dark skies. And I think that would give some reassurance to members. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so there's no comeback, our debate has gone on somewhat after the proposal and second, and with regard to conditions. Mrs. Armour, are you quite happy how we've conducted those additional conditions?
Yes, I'm absolutely fine. As long as the proposer and seconder are happy with all that's been discussed and the amendments, then I'm happy to proceed.
Once again, Councillor Cant, you're happy?
Very content, thank you.
Councillor Barnett, you're happy with those additional discussions. Thank you very much. Therefore, the recommendation is with the proposal of Councillor Cant and Councillor Barnett, that Head of Planning and Countryside be authorised to grant the planning permission for 20/02630/House at Gallants View at Lower Green and Inkpen. Mrs. Armour, if you'd be kind enough to conduct the name vote, please.
Okay, so for approval of the application, Councillor Abbs.
Against.
Councillor Barnett.
For.
Councillor Bennyworth.
For.
Councillor Cant.
For.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Culver.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
For.
Councillor Wollaston.
Sorry, for.
Okay. Councillor Hooker.
For.
Okay, so that's 8 for and 1 against.
Thank you, members. That application is approved. Mr. Till, any observation on appeals?
None this time round, Councillor Hooker. There will be an update with the next agenda.
Thank you very much. Members, thank you again for your contribution and the resolutions of these applications this evening. And I look forward to seeing you. Our next meeting is on the 24th of February. Until that time, have a good evening, and I say good night to you all.